Welcome to Wool Maven. This is Kathy, and on today's show, we're going to talk about which fiber tool for the job, and mainly we're going to stick with combs and cards. There's a few things you might do before combing and carding, like washing, dyeing, any of that, but we're going to stick with combs and cards for today. Most of this episode is going to be done as a comparison, so we'll talk about the main purpose of combs and the main purpose of cards, and then go into a section on what each one's best for, what they're really great at, and what maybe not so great at. So it's kind of a compare and contrast the whole way. And then there's a section at the end where I list out, maybe 10 or so different situations or things that your fiber might present to you and which one is probably your best shot for it. So that's kind of the outlook on where we're going to go. So anyway, back to the main purpose of combs and cards. The main purpose of any of your fiber tool is to separate out the fibers. But the combs are going to pull out anything that isn't top grade fiber. And what I mean by top grade fiber is the longest pieces for what you're working with, and anything else. So even if it's the same fiber, if it's still short bits, those are going to get pulled out. If it's some sort of tangle, neps, noils, especially vegetable matter, all that is going to get pulled out. Or actually more like fall out. It's when you comb, what you'll end up doing is straightening out the best fibers, and then you'll actually pull those off of the comb, and that is your original comb top, which will be wonderful, super top quality fiber that is all the best fibers of what you started with, and it will all be in kind of in a line like a river flowing. And the stuff that's left on the combs will be all the not so great stuff. And some of it is usable fiber and that you could use for something else, but a lot of it is going to be basically stuff you don't want in your yarn. So if you want a wonderful, smooth, worsted weight, even worsted prep yarn where it's smooth, everything's perfect, you want only top quality stuff in there, that's what you're going with for the combs. The cards are a little bit different. The cards are going to, I'll use the term loosely, comb out the fiber. They're going to kind of comb it apart in the way you'd say comb your hair, but they don't straighten things out in the way you think. They more fluff it up, but they do it they have a bunch of little kind of bent teeth, like a dog brush with just tons of teeth. And the teeth kind of grab the fibers in the middle of the fiber. And so the fiber is in like a V shape when it goes onto the card. Otherwise, if it wasn't in the V shape, it wouldn't go onto the card. It would still be where it started, right? It would just kind of comb through the fiber. But to get it to go onto the actual card, it has to hold on there somehow. So what it's doing is kind of grabbing the fibers in a V shape and smoothing them out, like separating them out, fluffing them up a little bit, but it's nowhere near the flatness and the smoothness or the separation and the sorting that you get from combs. So that they both fluff it up somewhat, they both remove some vegetable matter, but cards are basically much less picky. Cards will keep a ton more of your stuff in them. So what's your main purpose of, like, if you want to make something, what would you use combs for and what would you use cards for? Well, combs, like I said, would be used for any time you wanted to make a really, really smooth yarn with no imperfections in it whatsoever. And normally people would use combs for more of the longer wools. Really, you can put anything on there as long as you can actually comb it. But probably 3 inches is going to be getting to where it's going to be tough to do it. Anything over 3 inches, probably more like over 4 inches. But once again, give it a shot. If it works, then you can do it. Where combs excel is pulling out just the best of what you're working with, just the best, and it leaves everything else behind. What they're not great at is working with short fibers, and they are also, if you want the most spinning out of that fiber, like the most pounds or ounces of prepared fiber when you're done with your fiber prep, combs will actually probably get you around the least, because since they're so particular, since they sort out just the best, by definition, that means they're leaving a bunch of other stuff behind. Okay. So combs, you'll have a lot of it's waste, and I'm using the term waste in quotation marks. Sometimes it is actually stuff you don't want to use, but then other times, like, you generally move your fiber through the combs 2 or 3 times, and the first couple passes are going to be your vegetable matter and tangles, and you probably don't want that stuff, and you'd pull that off the back of the comb. But your last pass will just have shorter pieces. And those, if you like them, they would be fine to put back on the drum carder or to use with hand cards. But since they got sorted out by the combing process, they're obviously not the top grade of that fiber, or they would have been pulled off. They wouldn't be still stuck on the comb. So to sum that up, combs will, if you would comb versus card, and you would start out with a weighed amount of fiber, the combed top at the end is going to be much less than the carded roving at the end, just because the combs are so particular. But that is exactly what you want. So just know that, no need to panic. It's going to sort off a lot. Anyway, so what do you tend to use cards for? Cards are just used to open up the fiber. Generally, shorter things, if you have anything, like I mentioned, with 3 inches or less, you're definitely in card territory. And cards excel, as I mentioned, with the really short fibers, and you can do them with a little bit longer. Once you get maybe over, I'd say probably 4 inches, it's going to be a little bit more difficult just because of the length of the fibers. So when you go to pass the combs over each other, you have to make sure to kind of whoosh the one you're moving up in the air and then bring it down, so that the tails of the fiber that you carded last time don't get messed up in the little tines of the card. Otherwise, instead of straightening and fluffing, you're kind of tangling and remessing it up. If you can work the fiber on the card, then it obviously can be carded, but most people would use cards for the shorter stuff. And the other thing that cards are really great at anything you want to just fluff it up a little bit, separate it out so that you can get it good to go for, mostly people would be thinking woolen spinning, or at least woolen type spinning. Where cards aren't super great is they will not get out all the imperfections. Now, if you're okay with that, that doesn't matter. But if you start out with vegetable matter in your fiber, and I'll just say wool, if you start out with vegetable matter in your wool, there will still be some that will make it into the carded fiber that you pull off of the cards. They just do not separate out all the vegetable matter as much as the combs would. Now, that's not a problem. You can still pull out the little bits of hay or whatever it is as you're spinning. Whatever you put on the cards has vegetable matter in it. I would expect what you pull off the cards, which is called roving, I would expect that roving to still have some vegetable matter in it. It'll be less, but there'll still be some. And then it will also have, the cards will keep more of the tangles. The card won't keep all the tangles. That depends on how aggressively you card. But if you're not, and if maybe you overload like I occasionally do, then you can get the top looks done and the bottom kind of doesn't. But anyway, that's all up to you. And then the other thing I would say with hand cards is, and there's multiple kinds of cards, but with hand cards, they're kind of small. If you're looking for a decent amount to be carded, to be used when you're done, it's going to be a little while on the hand cards. But you could also use a drum carder or a flick carder. That's where we're going next. The difference between the cards is basically flick carder, hand carder, and drum carder. And flick carder is just a wee teeny little, and honestly looks like a little dog brush. And the head of it is kind of the size of a credit card probably. And you just use it to open up the ends of the locks. So most people wouldn't use it to comb or card out the entire lock. If they did, they would flick card one end, then turn it around and flick card the other end. And most people would use it by carding against like their thigh, So you put down a leather mat or be wearing a little more heavy duty pants. And then the hand card obviously are the bigger ones that you see people use, and the head of it's more like half the size of a sheet of paper. And then a drum card is the same teeth, the same carding cloth as your hand cards, and there's a little bit of variety of teeth per inch, but that's the basic idea. And it can do just so much more volume. It is less particular than the hand cards. You just have more control with the hand cards. And I have noticed that if I'm carding on the drum carder one of our fleeces and I didn't separate out the ends of the locks very well, and I hope the drum carder will do it, chances are it won't. So I needed to have it separated out a little bit better before I put it on the drum carder. Whereas if I was hand carding that same little section of fiber, I'd probably get those ends separated out. Way I handle that is just separate it out before I put it on the drum carder or deal with it when I'm spinning. But anyway, so that's an overview of the different cards. So if you're looking at your fiber and you're thinking, when would I use these? Well, if you want the best tool for the job, I have a variety pack of situations here, and I'll give you where I would go to first if I could use either. And obviously, as I said before, some fibers are just too short for your combs, and some fibers are just going to be difficult on your cards, or the prep you're looking for, you would prefer to use a different method. So if you want a poofier yarn, you're probably going to go more in the carding direction. And if you want a smoother yarn, you're probably going to go more in the combing direction. But anyway, we'll get into the list of the situations and what each one more excels at. So vegetable matter, as I mentioned, combs just do a ton better job than cards. Cards will take out a little bit, but nowhere near as much as combs. Combs really take it out. Short staple, you're looking at cards. Longer staple, you're probably looking at combs. Locks, probably. And when I say locks, I picture something like Blueface Leicester, the longer kind of curly ones. When I would look at something like that, that would be comb material. For me, you could try it on the cards. Something really long would definitely comb material. If you had more of the squarish locks of like a finer wool or a medium wool on the finer end, that you're probably thinking, oh gosh, you could do either if you got the link to put it on there. Whatever works for you. I've got some California Variegated Mutant that's obviously a finer wool, and it's doing beautifully on the combs. So honestly, give it a shot, see what works. But generally speaking, your finer wools are going to be more in the carded territory. Your mediums can go either way. That more depends on your preparation. So if you wanted it more woolen, go cards. If you wanted it more worsted, go combs. And then course, most people would be going for combs there. But once again, those are like generic recommendations. Whatever works for you is really what you need to be doing. If the wool's pretty crimpy, honestly, I think that matters less than whether it is what preparation you want to end up with at the end. So once again, if it's long enough, give it a whirl on the cards, on the combs. It might work out. The only real issue with crimpy is be sure you put on less than you think, and this would go for both combs and cards, because once you start going through it, it's going to poof like crazy. And a lot of wools, most wools do poof more than you think. But something with crimp, you'll really get that springing out there. So definitely go easy on what you load at the first. Anyway, for blending color, if you actually want to blend it, boy, either one would work. Either one would work. I would start with hand cards just to see what you're doing if you're going card, and then go with drum carder just because and I'm talking about me. If my big idea doesn't turn out the way I thought it would, I'd rather have a smaller amount than have a whole drum card's worth and then have a bunch of a color that I'm like, wow, I just really don't like that, or that didn't feel the way I wanted it to, right? So I'd start out with a smaller batch, but honestly, you could blend color on anything. Now, if you're blending fiber, that's different. If you're blending fibers, and I mean different lengths, if you're blending different lengths, you're going to need to do that on cards. If you want to blend different lengths or different types on combs, that's going to be tough because on combs, as I mentioned, combs separate by length. Even if you blend your fiber really, really well in your combing process, and we're talking about different lengths, when you go to pull it off the combs, which you'd normally do by pulling it off as a comb top. So you're pulling using your fingers and pulling it off like through a diz, or sometimes I just pull it off. But either way, what it's going to do is naturally keep the comb itself will keep the longer fibers coming to you and the shorter fibers will stay on the comb. So all your effort in blending it all up together is lost when you actually go to pull off your finished fiber. So if you were blending, like let's say you dyed up a bunch of Cordale and you wanted to blend your own pink, for instance, well, then that would work quite well because obviously you'd use some white and some red, but maybe you want to throw in a couple other cool colors. I like to do that. I don't like to be boring about it. I like to kind of throw in the rainbow and see what you end up with. I think that's really neat. But anyway, back to the point here. Since it's all Cordale in that situation, it would still work because it's all the same base fiber. The only thing that's different is the color. Whereas if you blended, like let's say Cordale and then you threw in some mohair, well, unless that mohair is short, you're going to end up pulling off all the mohair first because it's going to be longer, and then the Cordale. So it's going to sort out, which wouldn't be what you were thinking. And the opposite would be true. If you had Cordale and you mixed it with like a Southdown, well, then the Southdown's shorter, so you're going to end up pulling off all the Cordale first, then the Southdown. And maybe that's what you want, but most people, for all that work in blending, you wouldn't really want that. The next situation is, if you want maximum luster, you're definitely thinking combs, because combs line everything up and keep everything kind of flowing like a river, whereas cards make everything into like a little tornado. But if you pull everything out nice and straight off the combs, and that gives the maximum ability for the fiber to luster and shine. So if you want to maximize luster of what you have, in like the case of a long wool would be an easy example there, then you need to be thinking more combed to get more of a worsted fiber prep so that you can maximize your luster there. And as I mentioned before, the most spinning for your poundage or your ounces that you start out with, you're going to get more spinning out of carded fiber. And that is good and bad. The good being you get more spinning out of it. The bad being the potential bad being that you included some of the fibers that you would have sorted out with combing, which once again, it depends on what you're doing. Like right now, I'm working with some wool from one of our fleeces. I carded it. It's lovely and bouncy, and I like it. I'm having a good time. But if I combed it, a lot of the shorter fibers would be sorted out, which I could do, but I like what I'm getting right now, so I'm going with it. And then I kind of keep dancing around this, but if you want if you want perfect fiber only, you're looking at combs. And once again, they'll sort a lot, but that's what you ask them to do, is sort a lot. One more thing before we wrap up here. Hopefully I've been clear about this, but there really are no absolutes. What you end up with is what works for you. You need to try the fibers and see what you like. Comb a little bit of it, card a little bit of it, spin it up, and then use it in however you plan to use it. So I'll just say knit. So knit it up and even just a little, like make a little swatch and just see what you get. Because until you actually get the finished product, so I mean wash it and block it if you're going to, and do you like what you have? Do you end up with a fiber that just feels good to you, that's what you were going for? And if it is, then that's awesome. And if it isn't, then try something else. I find that I'll mess around with stuff and something I don't want to say come to me, but more something will grab my attention. And I'll card something and be like, wow, I like this. Or I'll card it and say, that went okay, but let's try it on the combs. Then the combs will be like, wow, I like that. So I think, at least from my experience, I end up with an easy preferred method for whatever I'm working with. You just don't know it until you kind of mess around with it and give it a shot. Hopefully that helps you clear up some of the confusion. Thanks for tuning in today. Always wonderful to have you. If you're interested, hit me up on Facebook. My group page is hand spinning yarn with a spinning wheel. Generic, I know, but hoping to find some people in search on that one. Anyway, hit me up on my Facebook group, or I have a YouTube channel, which is just Wool Maven. I also have a website where a lot of this information is listed out for anybody who prefer to read, actually, and it's woolmaven.com. Love to hear from you folks, and have a super day.